الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين وأفضل الصلاة وأتم التسليم على سيدنا محمد خاتم النبيين وإمام المرسلين وعلى آله الطيبين الطاهرين ومن تبعهم بإحسان إلى يوم الدين. أما بعد, السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. Hope you're all well. Welcome to the second lesson of our in our series on the hereafter and the afterlife. I'll do a quick reintroduction to the book, the text, and the topic, and then I will, inshallah, proceed to continue from where I left off from last week. The topic is on the hereafter. We're doing a reading of Sheikh Abdullah Sirajuddin's landmark work, Al-Iman bi Awalim al-Akhirah wa Mawaqifiha. I think it's his largest work as well on any topic. Maybe it's comparable in size-wise to his book on Shemail. The book is quite detailed. It covers all the topics in relation to what happens during death and thereafter. And today, inshallah, we're going to talk about two specific topics. Last week, we covered his introduction on why it's rationally the rationale behind believing in the hereafter, and why believing in the hereafter is almost a necessary state of affairs for anybody who reflects and contemplates on the world. We talked about elements of justice. We talked about the Sharia, why the Sharia also is important. Today, inshallah, the topics that I want to cover are, for those following the Arabic, we will begin from page 31. Al-Maut wa Haqiqatuhu, and we will cover death and what it actually means. And then we will look at the soul today, inshallah ta'ala, and some more details about the soul and its relationship with us, and to some degree its nature, the nature of the soul. We'll begin inshallah ta'ala. وقال المصنف رحمه الله تعالى وانفعنا بعلومه الموت وحقيقته. قال الإمام شيخ محي الدين ابن عربي رضي الله عنه اعلم أن الموت عبارة عن مفارقة الروح الجسد الذي كانت به حياته الحسية وهو طارئ عليها بعدما كان موصوفين بالاجتماع الذي هو علة الحياة. He begins, and I briefly discussed this chapter last week, briefly. And he quotes Shaykh al-Akbar right at the beginning. If you're not familiar with Muhyiddin ibn Arabi, probably the Etzuru series will give you more indication to who it was. Well, it's a bit of a, it seems historically that they would never have met. There's no evidence that they met at all. But, and Etzuru, the whole series is pretty much a work of fiction, historically speaking, as good as it is. However, it's true that he had great influence on the early Ottoman dynasty, you could call it that. So he says, Shaykh al-Akbar says that al-mawtu i'lam anna al-mawta, that death is ibaratun an mufaraqat al-ruhi al-jasad. That death, what's meant by death, is a separation of body and soul. الذي كانت به حياته الحسية, meaning it's meaning the body that previously gave kind of the perception of life anyway. وطارئ عليها بعدما كان موصوفين بالاجتماع الذي هو علة الحياة. Now, his definition, generally speaking, is a very, very basic definition, and it's just the idea that when you die, your soul separates from your body. This is not a dualism or anything of that kind, but it's just a very, very basic definition that pretty much everybody would agree upon. I don't think there's any issues with that. However, Ghazali later on the last paragraph of the book, he quotes Ghazali, وقال الإمام حجة الإسلام الغزالي رضي الله عنه قال بل الذي تشهد له طرق الاعتبار وتنطق به الآيات والأخبار أن الموت معناه تغير حال فقط. Ghazali makes something interesting. He says that death is merely a change of the state of affairs of a person. And I want to kind of look at that point, inshallah. that he writes that death, what is death? He writes death is تغير حال. It's a change of states or state of affairs only. What he means by that is, what we often wonder, when we die, are we transported into another body? Are we transported into another person? I.e., is there any remnants of ourselves left in this new existence? Or is it a complete different existence altogether, and we have maybe some memories or something of that kind? Or are we exactly the same? Ghazali writes no. Well, Ghazali writes that death is merely the changing of a state of affairs. وَأَنَّ الرُّوحَ بَاقِيَةٌ بَعْدَ مُفَارَقَةِ الْجَسَدِ, that the soul remains after it separates from the body. إِمَّا مُعَذَّبَ وَإِمَّا مُنَعَّمَةٌ. Either it receives punishment or it receives felicity. And then Shaykh Abdullah Sirajuddin continues to quote Ghazali. He said, وَمَعْنَ مُفَارَقَتِهَا الْجَسَدِ, what it means by, what is meant by separation from the body, انتقاء تصرفها عن الجسد, that what ends now is the ability to kind of use the body. You can't use the body anymore. The body now is essentially useless, it's dead. بخروج الجسد عن طاعتها فإن الأعداء آلات للروح تستعملها, that your limbs, meaning your body itself, or your limbs are merely tools that the soul utilizes in this life. حتى إنها الروح لتبطش باليد, that وتصمع بالأذن, that it's the soul actually that touches. It's the soul that's driving touch, and it's the soul that allows one to hear. It's the soul that allows one to hear. وتبصر بالعين, and to see. وتعلم حقيقة الأشياء بالقلب, and to know the reality of things, or to feel emotions, you could say, or know truth. I would rather put it that way, and to know truth internally, i.e., truth is, or to know truth, of what things are. It's something that's internal. It's not something external. It's something that we use our minds for, and something that we feel internally. وَالْقَلْبُ هَا هُنَا عِبَارَةٌ عَنِ الرُّوحِ, and he said the word heart that I'm going to use, he uses the word heart. He said I'm using it as a synonym for the soul, meaning the inner heart or the soul itself, not the piece of flesh in the body. And he writes, وَالْرُوحُ تَعْلَمُ الْأَشْيَاءَ بِنَفْسِهَا مِنْ غَيْرِ آلَةٍ. This is the important point that I want to mention. Two important points, but this is one of them. That he writes that the soul can understand things independent of the body, or independently. That in fact, all this kind of bodily actions that we have, the things that we do, that we can see ourselves doing, in fact, the soul is entirely capable of doing those things without the body itself. And what I mean by that is a few things specifically, i.e., that do not think that because the soul has been removed from the body, it cannot hear anymore, it cannot see anymore, it cannot feel anymore. These things are still all there. Then he says, فَكُلُّ مَا هُوَ وَصْفٌ لِلْرُوحِ بِنَفْسِهَا فَيَبْقَى مَعَهَا بَعْدَ مُفَارَقَةِ الْجَسَدِ. He said everything that the soul is generally attributed within a person still remains after departing from the body. Which is interesting, and that brings me back to my original point, which was, do we still have our personalities when we die? Are our personalities still intact? Are our memories still there? And it seems all of those things are still intact. Now, is there an example of that? One may say, oh, well, I have had no experience of that. How can I, what will that be like? Well, think about the hadith of the Messenger of God, alayhi salatu wasalam, where he said that sleep is the younger sibling of death. And there's an indication there in that particular hadith that if you want to feel what death is like to a degree, then just everybody can recall how they feel in their dreams. Now, dreams often, for most people anyway, are such that you don't know you're dreaming, or that dream state is a state that's very, very real to you. you can hear, you can feel, you can taste even, you can do all of these things, and yet you do not know you're in the dream world, in most cases anyway. And so we have already experienced, and this is my point, an out of body, we have already had an out of body experience. We have already had, or we have every day, an experience of another world. And I think this kind of analogy works really well, in the sense that, and the Sheikh plays on that later in the book as well, looks at the idea, calls it Alam al-Ru'ya, the world of, or the realm of dreams. Are they true? Are they not? Does that world actually exist? Is it merely just kind of a projection? But the fact that people, when we're often scared of death, or think, okay, what is it going to feel like? Is it going to be something completely different? But the fact that we have outer body experiences every single day, that we live other lives every night, and we know that we don't actually exist on that plane. We exist on this plane. So that should give an example of what it's actually, maybe not like, but again, I would say what it's actually like, meaning how to exist outside of this existence right now. So how people can deny it is odd, because we have this kind of multi-dimensional existence already. In the next chapter, page 33, he begins to talk about kalimatu hawli ruh al-insani, some words related to the soul, the human soul. Now, does the soul look different to the body? Is it different? What does it look like? There's a misnomer almost, or you could call it actually a misconception. The way we've conceived the idea, it's incorrect. That the soul is something like, if you remember the cartoon Casper the Ghost, it's kind of this white thing that floats around, or no, it's not the case at all. In fact, I think it was Abdul Aziz Dabbar in his Ibris talks about that the soul looks just like the human body, but it has more light, it's more illuminating, or illuminated. It's not this kind of this loose, kind of malleable smoke or something like that. He writes, أولا أما حقيقة روح الإنسان فقد سئل النبي عليه الصلاة والسلام عنها. As for the reality of the soul, what is the soul? Like I said in my last lesson, that the topic of consciousness to date has never ever been tackled except by spiritualists, people of religion, and people out of religion. Neurologists have, by and large, written nothing of value in relation to consciousness. Very, very little. I've read quite a bit now on kind of the positions of the current state of affairs in terms of the experts and different discussions in neurology related to one, the brain, but also this idea of consciousness. Does the brain create consciousness, which is generally the understood position, or is consciousness something external, i.e. do we believe in a post-material consciousness, where we believe we receive consciousness and the mind, the brain is merely a receiver. So there's this discussion going on, but they've written nothing meaningful anyway about consciousness. This is not something you can measure, something you can prove even exists in a material sense. But we believe in it as people of religion. We all believe in it, of course, consciousness. We all believe in it because we're all conscious beings. But in terms of the nature of it, the Messenger of God was also asked about that. So if you want to call the soul consciousness, if you want to call it something else, it doesn't really matter. We're talking kind of about the same thing. The Prophet ﷺ, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala reveals in the Quran, وَيَسْأَلُونَكَ عَنِ الرُّوحِ قُلِ الرُّوحُ مِنْ أَمْرِ رَبِّي وَمَا أُوتِيتُم مِنَ الْعِلْمِ إِلَّا قَلِيلًا. That they ask about the soul. قُل, say, قُلِ الرُّوحُ, that the soul is min amri rabbi, is from the affair of my sustainer. And I'm going to talk about what that means. وَمَا أُوتِيتُم مِنَ الْعِلْمِ, and you have not been given knowledge, إِلَّا قَلِيلًا, except little, or you have only been given little knowledge about it. And the Shaykh says, وَذَلِكَ أَنَّ النَّبِيَّ صلى الله عليه وسلم حين كان في مكة سألته قريش عن الروح. So he quotes this riwayah Tahir ibn Ashur, rahimahullah, Shaykh al-Islam of the Malikis, who wrote a magnum opus of tafsirs in 30 volumes, documents under Surah Al-Kahf the reasons why Surah Al-Kahf was revealed. And in that he tries to put together all the riwayat, all the reasons for the reason that surah was revealed. And he casts some doubt over this particular narration. He says the narration about the Quraysh challenging the Prophet ﷺ, it's narrated by Abdullah bin Mas'ud. There's some fihi nazar yani. It may have some weakness to it. However, other scholars have taken it and they have mentioned it in the books of tafsir. What is that narration anyway? I'll put the narration out there. The narration is that the Quraysh challenged the Messenger of God, or rather, the Quraysh allotted 2 people to send to Medina because they had no knowledge of previous Abrahamic texts. They had very little knowledge of Abrahamic faith. And they had very little knowledge of the Torah. So they sent 2 people to Medina Munawwara, which was called Yathrib at that time, to ask the Jewish rabbis to verify or to look for something to test the Messenger of God with. Though he claims to be in the line of Abraham, and so do you, considering that. You have access to these religious texts. Maybe you have something we can ask him to verify his prophethood. So these 2 men, they go to Medina Munawwara, and the Jewish rabbis give them 3 questions. They say, look, ask him these 3 questions. If he answers them, then he's a prophet. Now, it's quite odd actually, the story, but the 3 questions are, number 1, ask him about the young people that lived many, many years ago, alluding to the Ashabul Kahf, the people who ran into it and took refuge in the cave. Number 2, ask him about a man who traveled east and west, an inference to the story of Dhul Qarnayn. Both of these, of course, mentioned in Surah Al-Kahf. And then ask him about the soul. And if he answers regarding the soul, then he is not a prophet, in one riwayah. In another narration, it just says, ask him about the soul. Story is that they come back and they ask the Messenger of God, and he says to them, give me some time and I will, and he retreats to his house. So they know that he hasn't gone out anywhere, and he retreats to his house and he locks the door and he says, give me a few days, 3 days. And I think 3 days. And God reveals nothing to him. And then after 15 days, God reveals, Alhamdulillahi alladhi anzala ala abdihi al-kitaba wa lam yaj'al lahu iwaja. The Surah Al-Kahf is revealed. And the Messenger of God comes out. And the story is that the reason that it was delayed and it wasn't given within 3 days is the Prophet didn't say inshallah. And there's a verse that infers that. Allah knows best. That particular story in its entirety seems to have some weakness in it. Some of it, of course, makes quite rational. It makes sense. And then he comes out, alayhi salatu wasalam, and he gives them the answers. But the problem with the story is this verse, وَيَسْأَلُونَكَ عَنِ الرُّوحِ, is not in Surah Al-Kahf. It's in Surah Al-Anbiya. Now, Surah Bani Israel, I think. If my memory serves me correctly, but it's not in Surah Al-Kahf. Now, some say that to answer that kind of question, it must have been revealed again. Or it had already been revealed, that particular question had already been revealed to the Prophet ﷺ. And other riwayat don't even mention the soul. So Allah Ta'ala alam. But there's a sound narration in Al-Bukhari where the Prophet ﷺ is walking and some of the Jews are nudging each other and they say, ask him a question. And then they ask about the soul. And that's in Bukhari. I think it may also be in Sahih Muslim as well. Yeah, it's in Sahihain. And then Allah reveals, وَيَسْأَلُونَكَ عَنِ الرُّوحِ قُلِ الرُّوحُ مِنْ أَمْرِ رَبِّي وَمَا أُوتِيتُم مِنَ الْعِلْمِ إِلَّا قَلِيلًا. So, Surah Al-Isra. Now, so that story has an indication definitely in there, and we can benefit from that story definitely. The Shaykh says on the next page, he writes, قال ابن مسعود فعلمت أنه يوحى إليه فقمت مقامي فلما نزل الوحي قال وَيَسْأَلُونَكَ عَنِ الرُّوحِ قُلِ الرُّوحُ مِنْ أَمْرِ رَبِّي وَمَا أُوتِيتُم مِنَ الْعِلْمِ إِلَّا قَلِيلًا. That narration, Ibn Mas'ud says that then the verse was revealed when they asked that question, and I could tell that the verse was being revealed. And a few of the Sahaba talk about how they knew that a verse was being revealed. Zayd bin Harith states that one day the Messenger of God was leaning on me, and he said that Allah revealed a verse of Quran, and I thought my shoulder was going to break, meaning the weight of the revelation could be felt on my shoulder. Now the Shaykh says, وَالْمُرَادُ بِالرُّوحِ هُنَا الروح الإنساني بدليل ما ورد ابن عباس رضي الله عنهما أنه قال إن اليهود قالوا للنبي صلى الله عليه وسلم أخبرنا عن الروح فكيف تعذب الروح التي في الجسد وإنما الروح من الله. So this is the same story again that the Jews are asking the Messenger of God عليه الصلاة والسلام, and Allah revealing the verse. Now the Shaykh talks about these two ideas, and very, very interesting and important ideas. The idea of something being ex nihilo, and something being created from something else. That he talks about that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala creates things in two ways. You have the idea of something being ex nihilo, where Allah Jalla wa ala creates something from nothing, something didn't exist, min al-ma'dum ila al-mawjud, and then it exists. And he calls this alam al-amr. He writes, and the other being something is created from something else, although the original thing would have been from this first type I mentioned, but then it's created from something else. He writes, rahimullah ta'ala, فَعَالَمُ الْخَلْقِ هُوَ خُلِقَ بِأَمْرٍ مِنَ اللَّهِ تَعَالَى لَهُ كُنْ فَيَكُونَ وَلَكِنْ مِنْ مَادَةٍ. Now when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says kun fayakun, sometimes he creates from something. So something is already created that he created previously. And from that, a mada, something is created. وَيَجْرِي عَلَيْهَا تَرْكِيبُ وَالتَّطْوِيرُ وَالتَّوَالُدُ وَذَلِكَ كَجِسْمِ الْإِنسان. And he gives an example of the body of a human being being created from turab, being created from earth, and other things as well, like water and many other things. So that was created from something. Then he says, وَأَمَا عَالَمُ الْأَمْرِ فَهُوَ مَا خُلِقَ بِمُجَرَّدِ قَوْلِ اللَّهِ تَعَالَى لَهُ كُنْ دُونَ أَنْ يَكُنْ لَهُ مَادَةٌ. Where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala creates something ex nihilo. He says be, and that thing is created from non-existence, i.e. not from non-existence, because non-existence, laysa bihal, is not a state, but it's something that previously did not exist and now it exists. Now, he writes that the human being is the combination of two things, two forms of creation. He writes the one form of creation is the fact that he was created from turab, from earth, from material, from matter, from different things. And the other is that part of the human being is from this form of creation, is from the form of creation from kun, ex nihilo, i.e. that God said be and it just became, i.e. it was created there and then from nothing. And then Allah Jalla wa ala combined the two. And then he writes that this verse also infers, he writes, ثُمَّ إِنَّهُ سُبْحَانَهُ وَتَعَالَى on page 35, سَجَّلَ عَلَى الْإِبَادِ سَجَّلَ قِلَّةَ الْعِلْمِ. Sajjala means to register or to, but here it means he encoded within the human being the idea of ignorance, or the idea of the idea that human beings have very little knowledge, that human beings are very arrogant. We think we know everything, but the Shaykh makes a good point. وَأَنَّ مَا عِنْدَهُمْ مِنَ الْعِلْمِ فَهُوَ مِمَّا آتَاهُمْ وتفضل به عليهم سبحانه وتعالى وأن العلم المحيط بكل شيء هو الله تعالى وحده. But then he continued and says وهذه القلة في العلم التي أوتوها هي في غاية القلة ومهما تصورها الإنسان من قلة فهي أقل وأقل. It's a good point. He says whenever we reflect about what knowledge we have, we just realize how little we have, and the more we learn, the more we realize that we have very little knowledge. Imam Shafi'i talked about this, and he said the more I come to know, the more ignorant I realize I am. And ignorant not in the sense of somebody as a pejorative, but the fact that the more I realize, the little I know. I mean, especially when people begin to study Sharia and things like that, our perception of religion, for instance, is before we learn anything is that we know everything, or we know what needs to be known. But then when we begin to study and read, and we begin to see the expanse of Islamic literature on topics, and we read the Quran, and we learn what little we know. And he writes that this is almost programmed into the human being, that he knows very little and his ignorance is great. And he mentions a story of Sayyidina Khadir. There's a story that Khadir, who's mentioned in Surah Al-Kahf, is Abdun min Ibadina. He's mentioned as a person in the Quran. Allah doesn't mention his name in the Quran, but his name is mentioned in the Hadith, or his title, Khadir. And he's a very important character in the Quran, in the Surah Al-Kahf. And he's a person who lived in the time of Moses. There's a whole debate of if he was alive since the time of Abraham. There's also a debate if he's still alive. For instance, some believed that he's passed away, and others, some believe that he's still alive even now. From those who believed he's still alive even now are, for instance, Imam al-Nawawi and others. I think Abu Faraj al-Jawzi, Abdul Rahman, the great scholar of the 6th, 7th century, believed that he had passed away. So there is a khilaf on that issue. It's not an issue of religion anyway. It's if he's alive or he's passed away. Allah Ta'ala alam. And then there's a debate: is he a human being or an angel? And then there's a debate: is he a prophet or a man of God, or a saint? And there's all these debates amongst the scholars. But in this story, he's sitting on the boat. If you recall the story of the boat in Surah Al-Kahf, and he's sitting with Musa alayhi salam, and there's a bird on the edge of the boat, and it dips its beak into the water and takes one drop of water, a few droplets of water. And he looks at Musa alayhi salam, and he says, "What's my knowledge and your knowledge? For indeed the knowledge of God is what this is. Our knowledge is as much as that bird is taken into its mouth in comparison to the ocean, and the ocean being the knowledge of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala." And he mentions that particular story. And then he continues, and he says, وَهَذَا الْمِثَالِ, towards the end of the page, جَعَ لِبِيَانِ سَعَةِ عِلْمِ اللَّهِ تَعَالَى الَّذِي لَا يَتَنَاهَى. That God's knowledge, this is just a story to indicate, or as an inference to the greatness of God's knowledge, and God's knowledge is infinite, metaphysically, that it has no limit. You cannot add to it, you cannot remove from it. And then he continues, and he discusses on the next page a couple of very important things I want to talk about. He begins kind of midway on the page I'm going to read from. He writes, ثم إن عالم الأمر الذي ألحمنا إليه وداخل في عالم الملكوت الذي جاء ذكره في الآيات القرآنية والأحاديث النبوية كما أن عالم الخلق داخل في جملة عالم الملك وكل من العالمين مذكورين. الملك والملكوت بيد الله تعالى يتصرف فيهما كما يشاء كما هو مقتضى حكمته الموافقة لعلمه سبحانه وتعالى. He writes, and he's going to begin his discussion on this now, about the different realms of existence. And let me explain what he's tapping into here. He's saying, look, there's a perceivable world that we have in front of us. I can see this book. You can see me, although it's a virtual world. Maybe we need to add that world now, a virtual world. It's another alam now. But what we can see in the physical world is the realm of our bodies. But the soul cannot be seen by anybody. I can't see the soul, you can't see the soul. So is there a world, a dimension that exists where the soul can be seen? And are there other things in that dimension that also exist, that can see one another? For instance, take the angels. Yesterday we were talking in the discussion of the Quran and the virtues of the Quran. We mentioned the story of some of the Sahaba reading the Quran, and when he saw the cloud with the lights in the cloud, and the Prophet ﷺ said that if you had stopped reading, everybody would have seen it, meaning those were the angels. And he says that these two things, this way that God creates, they actually lead to two other things: that the body exists in a particular dimension, and the soul also exists in a particular dimension. And he will discuss them in details. He mentions a few verses. تبارك الذي بيده الملك وهو على كل شيء قدير فسبحان الذي بيده ملكوت كل شيء وإليه ترجعون. Now, he quotes a story later on, alluding to that, which I'll mention later. But I want to move on to now the discussion that the Sheikh mentions about the different worlds, and it's on the next page, on page 37. And he writes towards the end of the page. He says, وَقَدْ كَثُرَتْ أَقْوَالُ الْعُلَمَاء فِي الْفَرْقِ بَيْنَ هَذِهِ الْأَوَالِمَ الثَّلَاثَ. That there are these three dimensions, you could call them. I want to call them dimensions here. What are those three dimensions? He mentioned them earlier. You have the malakut, you have the jabarut. These are the two main. Some say they are two, and some say they are three. So he has mulki wal malakut wal jabarut, and I want to talk about all three. And he gives several ahadith to prove their existence, especially of jabarut and malakut. And he also gives al-kibriya as well, but he says that's in reference to something else. But he gives kibriya azama, but that's not in reference to the same thing. He writes, Anna alam al-amri yusamma alam malakut. That the plane of existence, the dimension that the soul exists, our souls, is known as alam al-malakut. Alam al-malakut. And it's the station, or rather the dimension, that the souls and wa ruhaniyat wa nufus, souls and other entities, I would argue, exist. سمي بذلك لأنه يوجد بأمر الحق سبحانه وتعالى بلا واسطة مادة ومدة. It's called alam al-amri, or it's called alam al-malakut, because it was created without the intervention of anything else, i.e. it was directly created from nothing, or it came from a state, it came into existence after not existing, and there was nothing that it was created from that we know of. Then he says there's another plane of existence called alam al-mulki, and it's known as the dimension, or you could say the physical dimension, the material dimension. And he says that's alam al-shahada, the plane or the realm of witnessing. وهو عالم الأجسام والجسميات, and it's that which physical bodies exist. وما يوجد بعد الأمر بمادة, it was created from something, and we talked about that earlier. So these are the two basic things we covered earlier, where the soul exists and where the body exists. But then he adds a third, and this is a discussion for some debate and some controversy. وعالم الجبروت, and Jabarut has always been one that the kind of the ascetics and the Gnostics and people of spirituality have always debated and discussed, because it's now we're talking about something that is quite interesting as well. فاختلف فيه العارفون. The people of God differed about this. Some of them said ومشتق من الجبر وهو القهر فيشمل عمل البرزخ بعد الموت. That this particular plane of existence is Jabarut. What is it? Some said it includes al-barzakh. Barzakh is this intermediary realm that exists after death. وَبَيْنَهُمَا بَرْزَخٌ لَا يَبْغِيَانِ. Allah mentioned Surah Yasin. And it includes وَعَالَمْ مَوْقِفِ الْحَشَرِ. It includes the hereafter. And the reason it's called Alam al-Jabarut is from Jabar. Jabar means force, power, or administering of that power. And the fact that God's Jabar, his power, is shown in the barzakh and is shown in the hereafter is the reason it's called Alam al-Jabarut. And then he gives another position as well, that actually this Jabarut is a place that includes where it's the dimension that uqul and nufus exist. All those things that we consider to be immaterial, like uqul, like our, you can say consciousness exists, and our nufus and spirits exist. That's Alam al-Jabarut. Abu Talib al-Makki, the author of Qut al-Qulub, and Qut al-Qulub is almost like the base text for the Ihya Ulumuddin of Ghazali. It's the base text, who Ghazali was greatly inspired by. Yeah. So he writes that huwa alamul azama, fayashmalu alam al-Akhirah. It's the realm, this Jabarut, the realm of magnanimity, and it includes the Akhirah. But he mentions something very, very interesting after that. He writes that it also includes وَعَالَمُ أَرْضِ الْحَقِيقَةِ الَّتِي تُرَى فِيهَا الْأَشْيَاءَ عَلَى حَقَائِقِهَا. You know, we exist in this earth. This is not the Shaykh quote, this is just me commenting on it, and I'll explain what he said. We exist on the earth, and human beings have reached a state of arrogance that we think that we know everything, about everything, the reality of all things. But the reality actually is that we know very, very little. The more we investigate, the more we conduct scientific experiments, collect data, the more we come to know that we know very little. Look at the current discussions and debates in the last decade now, quantum mechanics, and how complex it's become. What we thought before, what we thought 100 years ago, or the way we were thinking about things, and the reality we don't anymore. DNA was only discovered around 60, 70 years ago. The more we investigate, the more we come to know that we were ignorant of many, many things. And the more we look at things in detail, the more detail that appears in God's creation, Jalla wa'ala. I mentioned last time, it's a very interesting book. If you read it, Signature in the Saw by Stephen Meyer, where he talks about the details of DNA and how they can possibly prove the existence of God. And he writes, Rahimullah Ta'ala, that it's that dimension, that existence, where things can be known, or the true reality of things can be known. It's a spiritual dimension where you can know things based on their true reality, not on what your mind tricks you into thinking, or your experience, or the idea that you have a certain amount of knowledge that is a certain amount of knowledge that tells you that this thing is this way, or this thing is that way. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he writes, وَقَدْ حَثَّ تَعَالَى عِبَادَهُ أَنْ يَنْظُرُوا فِي الْعَالَمِينَ. And God didn't tell us only to look at this physical world, but told us to look at both worlds. The alam al-mulki wa alam al-malakut. The alam al-mulk, this alam, the physical realm, the material realm, but also this, I would call it now, the realm of spirits, the realm beyond, the realm of the unseen. Allah states in the Quran, أَفَلَمْ يَنْظُرُوا إِلَى السَّمَاءِ فَوْقَهُمْ كَيْفَ بَنَيْنَاهَا وَزَيَّنَّاهَا وَمَا لَهَا مِنْ فُرُوجٍ. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, do they not look to the universe, the samai, above them, how we created it and beautified it? That's the physical world that we can see. God further in another verse states, أَفَلَا يَنْظُرُونَ إِلَى الْإِبِلِ كَيْفَ خُلِقَتْ. Do they not look at the camel, how it was created? So these are two verses that talk about looking at the material world. What about this spirit world? What about this world beyond that we're talking about? And by the way, in regard to the spirit world, we now have data that's suggestive, that suggests. The reason I'm using words like suggest, I'm trying to keep that, so I'm using scientific words because I'm mentioning kind of the scientific evidence that's available. The data that we have data now that suggests that the existence of other planes of existence. For instance, take hallucinogenics, take DMT for instance. People who take DMT have had, if you read a book called The Spirit Molecule, or the people who take ayahuasca, have all had very, very similar experiences of, you could call it the unseen, of other dimensions. There's one theory that it's just their brains generating it, but all the studies so far have suggested that it's not actually at all. The frontal cortex is almost entirely silenced, or it's inactive, almost entirely inactive. Where are they receiving all this imagery from, these visions? And same with ayahuasca and things of that nature. Jordan Peterson, for instance, commented on this and said, this is clear data that we have now of the existence of other planes, or the existence of other dimensions and other realities. And this is for the first time now, scientists now are looking into this idea of, is there a way to access these other dimensions? And historically, people have been doing it through these hallucinogenics and other things. The people of spirituality have done it through training. They've done it through fasting. They've done it through seclusion, khalwa, and they've had these visions of the unseen, you could call them. In fact, the Messenger of God, and I don't want to compare the Messenger of God and put him into this category in any way or form, but just to play on the idea that the Messenger of God, alayhi salatu wasalam, in the first hadith in Badul Wahi in Sahih Bukhari, narrates that he was receiving revelation in the form of clear visions for 6 months before the first revelation came to him, alayhi salatu wasalam. And he would seclude himself to the mountain, and he would have these visions, alayhi salatu, of truth, of reality. Now, Allah talks about this other dimension and says, أَوَلَمْ يَنْظُرُوا في ملكوت السماوات والأرض, using that word malakut. Do they not look into the malakut السماوات of these universes and the earth? وما خلق الله من شيء. And the Shaykh writes that this is a clear indication, but then he adds to it a wonderful verse of Sayyidina Ibrahim. Allah says, وَكَذَلِكَ نُرِي Bab If'al. Ara Yuri, we showed Ibrahim, Ibrahim, malakutu samawati wal ard. The malakut, these are samawati wal ard, meaning these hidden dimensions of the universes and the earth. وَلِيَكُونَ مِنَ الْمُوقِنِينَ, so that he will be from the muqinin, the people who have firm certainty. Allah states. But then he says there's something greater. There's a greater evidence he uses. He says, وَأَعْظَمُ مَنْ أَرَاهُ اللَّهُ ذَلِكَ وَأَطْلَعَهُ عَلَى جَمِيعِ مَا هُنَالِكَ, on page 39. That he says, and greater, the greatest of he who God displayed these wonders to, showed, and revealed this form of knowledge to, was Sayyidina Muhammad alayhi salatu wasalam, was our master Muhammad alayhi salatu wasalam. And the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he quotes a hadith, فَتَجَلَّى لِي كُلُّ شَيْءٍ وَعَرَفْتُ. He said, everything was unveiled to me, فَعَرَفْتُ. And then I knew, then I came to realization. And he quotes the hadith, the famous hadith of Tirmidhi and Ahmad, فَعَلِمْتُ مَا فِي السَّمَاوَاتِ وَمَا فِي الْأَرْضِ. And then I came to know. In this vision that the Prophet ﷺ had. The different variants of the tradition. رَأَيْتُ رَبِّي فِي أَحْسَنِ الصُّورَةِ and other narrations. And then I knew in the vision, the Messenger of God says what was in the universes and in the earth. مَا فِي السَّمَاوَاتِ وَالْأَرْضِ وَمَا فِي الْأَرْضِ. And in another variation of Tabarani, فَعَلَّمَنِي كُلَّ شَيْءٍ. And he, Allah, showed me or taught me everything. Meaning all of these, what was in these hidden dimensions. Then the Shaykh continues, and he says, ثانيا إن روح الإنسان هو شريفة كريمة قدسية عالية أعلن الله. That the human soul is something that Allah talks about with great about a great sense of nobility about the human soul. And God mentions the greatness of the soul and how sacred the soul is and how noble it is. God says, فَإِذَا سَوَّيْتُهُ وَنَفَخْتُ فِيهِ مِنْ رُوحِي فَقَعُوا لَهُ سَاجِدِينَ. An incredible verse in the Quran. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala states, فَإِذَا سَوَّيْتُهُ, and when God created it, molded it. وَنَفَخْتُ, in the body, فَنَفَخْتُ فِيهِ مِنْ رُوحِي. There's debate about that verse. وَنَفَخْتُ فِيهِ مِنْ رُوحِي. That literally would translate as, and we blew into it from our ruh, from my ruh. Now, God does not have a ruh, we know that. God does not have a soul or spirit. Why does God say ruhi? We know in the Quran that the way that Allah Jalla Ala speaks in the Quran, whenever God attributes something to himself in this way, he's talking about its magnanimity, its greatness, and the great sharaf or nobility that God's given to that. فَقَعُوا لَهُ سَاجِدِينَ, and they all fell in prostration to Allah Jalla wa Ala. And this we'll look at a bit later, the idea of the single consciousness, say that Adam and that everybody being created from that. Or was it the messenger of God and everything being created from that, and that idea? Allah says, وَأَمَّا شَرَفُ جِسْمِهِ, as for the body, God says, فَسَوَّيْتُهُ, we created and formed the body. هذا النذير قوله تعالى وما منعك أن تسجد لما خلقت بيدي. Now I want to move on from this part, and I've already mentioned his discussion on why the soul is so noble. And I want to move to page number 40 to the bottom of the page, and I want to look at this the existence of the soul and the different ranks of the soul a little bit anyway. Although I touched on it in the Burda, but this is a bit different. It says, وَإِذَا أَثْقَلَ الْإِنسَانُ بَدَنَهُ. The Shaykh says when a human being, he burdens his body, or who weighs his body down, with what? بِالْمَآكِلِ وَالْمَشَارِبِ, by eating lots of food, gluttony essentially. وَأَخْلَدَ إِلَى الشَّهَوَاتِ وَكَثْرَةُ النَّوْمِ وَرَاحَةِ. That he becomes serial procrastinator, or she, and they give themselves into shahwat, desires. He writes that, and all they're concerned is with bodily ladhat, kind of. They want to just fulfill the desire, bodily desires. Then that will weigh the soul down. And the Messenger of God mentioned it, even for health reasons. I would recommend to everybody currently, with the crisis that we have, the pandemic, and may Allah give shifa to all those people that are unwell, and give them a speedy recovery, and all those who have passed away from it, Allah forgive them and raise their rank in Al-Jannah. That I will say that we should take the advice of the Messenger of God as well, and it's an important piece of advice, I think. All the advice is important, especially in this regard, that if everybody wants to kickstart their immune system, then probably is a good time to start fasting. Keeping fast in this month, the month of Sha'ban, was the Messenger of God did not fast in any month more outside of Ramadan more than Sha'ban. And fasting will give us, reboot our immune system. There's massive benefits of fasting in terms of how it benefits the immune system. So definitely, maybe rather than being at home and binging all day when all our lockdown snacks, seclusion snacks, maybe we should start fasting and keeping fast most days to reboot our immune system, to benefit our immune system. And also another point in the famous hadith, that to give ourselves a chance to breathe as well. Fasting does help. The less we eat, the more we can breathe. And we need to breathe right now. If anything, we need to breathe. And we need we need to work our lungs. That's just a piece of advice from the Messenger of God ﷺ that I believe is important in this particular period for all of us. But he writes, look at the opposite. وَلِذَلِكَ تَرَى الرَّجُلَ الصَّالِحِ فِي الْعَمَلِ. But then when you see a person who is pious in their action, صادق في عبادته لربه, is true to their Lord in their worship. المخلص لله في دينه لله المخلص لله تعالى should be في دينه. In his religion he is sincere. ترى بدنه عندك في الأرض ولكن روحه قلبه في العالم العلوي. Although he sees his body in this world, but his soul is felicitous. His soul is in a higher realm. And he quotes a hadith of a particular companion, Haritha bin Malik. There are various narrations of this story, which are interesting. So Haritha comes to the Messenger of God. And he says to the Messenger of God, so he writes that عزفت وزهدت نفسه عن الدنيا, that he had taken a state where, and I do want to mention something very important here, that the sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ is to be mu'tadil, is to be mutawassit, is to be in the middle, not to be extreme one way or extreme another way. These stories are often an indication to a slightly higher spiritual state, and that for the masses generally they stick to a particular state, but some that go beyond that, other few and the elect, Haritha seems to be from them. And we have to first master our basics, of course, basic things, keeping fast on Mondays and Thursdays, 3 times in the middle of the month, before we can really discuss or be part of this type of group of people. He writes, he comes to the Messenger of Allah ﷺ, and he says, قال له كيف أصبحت يا حارث بن مالك. The Messenger of God says, how did you wake up today? فقال أصبحت مؤمن حقا. He says, I awoke a true believer today. The Prophet ﷺ says, إن لكل حق حقيقة. For every reality, for everything that's said to be true, there must be a reality. What's the state of your iman? What's the reality of your iman? Meaning that, how do you know that? For every truth, meaning you woke up a true believer. For every haqq, he said, mu'min haqqa, true believer. What's the state of affairs related to that? Allah, he writes that I took myself away from the dunya. Azaftu nafsi an dunya. Ashartu layli. I would wake up in the night, I would pray. Fadma'atu nahari. Faka'ani anzuru ila arsh. And in one narration, I would fast in the daytime. When I woke in the morning, I saw arsh rabbi, anzuru ila arsh rabbi afwan. Barizan lil hisab. ولكأني أنظر إلى أهل الجنة يتزاورون فيها. It's as if I could see the people of Jannah therein. وَلَكَأَنِّي أَسْمَعُ إِوَاءَ أَهْلِ النَّارِ, and I could hear the screaming of the people of the fire. There are various narrations that add things to this as well. Now, does this mean that he had a vision, or does it mean he actually saw it? He saw the malakut? Both are possible. وروى ابن أبي شيبة في كتاب الإيمان بإسناده عن محمد بن صالح أن رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم لقي عوف بن مالك. In another narration, it's Auf ibn Malik that he meets. And same question, he asks him and says, أصبحت مؤمن حقا. Same thing. And then he writes this, he says the same thing. And so it could be one or the other of the companions that we're talking about. The Messenger of God on the next page, فقال صلى الله عليه وسلم عرفت أو لقنت فلزم, meaning now you know, you've come to realization. فلزم, meaning hold on to it. In another, Abdun nawar Allah qalbahu, this is a servant that God has given light to his heart. So this particular station is a station of ma'rifah, is of gnosis, of knowing, of certainty, that doesn't come upon everybody. We're coming close to the end now of the hour. So inshallah, I want to stop there. Next week we will continue. May Allah forgive all our sins and raise our rank and give us more knowledge of Allah and His Messenger alayhi salatu wasalam, and give us ease in this time and remove panic and anxiety. And then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala give us tawfiq to read the book of Allah and reflect over His signs. أقول قولي هذا وأستغفر لي ولكم وأتوب إليه ولسائر المسلمين.